Welcome back to Inside City Hall. As we told you before the break, it's been a wild 24 hours with two former Trump allies facing potentially decades of prison time. And one of those allies, Michael Cohen, even implicating the president in campaign finance crimes. The White House today defended Trump and repeatedly said that he did nothing wrong. But what does all of this mean for the president legally? Here now to break it down for us, we've got former Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, who was a member of the House Judiciary Committee during Watergate and voted to impeach Richard Nixon. She's the author of a new book called The Case for Impeaching Trump. It's due out in October. Michael Waldman is here. He is the president of the Brennan Center for Justice at NY1 School of Law and a former aide to President Clinton. Thank you both for being here. Very good to see you. And
great to be here.
Liz, this does to me feel a lot like the summer of 1974 when I was a kid, and it just seemed like every few days there was a big headline, and it gradually built a portrait of, and the picture became, it sort of came into focus that people's worst fears were being realized. What's the picture we're seeing this summer being created here?
Well, I think we're beginning to see some of the same things that have the resonance of Watergate. First of all, now you have a president, he calls the actions of the special prosecutor disgraceful, but he is a disgraced president. We now have somebody who's sworn in court, open court before a judge, that he himself is guilty, but he was ordered by the president of the United States to commit a campaign finance crime, a felony. So we now have charges that the president himself is involved in criminal conduct. This is a disgraceful moment for the president, for America, but this is only the beginning. We have his campaign manager, who was just convicted, his meaning Donald Trump's campaign manager was just convicted of various kinds of tax evasion and bank fraud and so forth. Well, Manafort's got another trial. These people may cooperate. Well, we know that Michael Cohen wants to cooperate. He has much more to tell. Manafort, we don't know yet, but he may have a lot to tell. So we have a president whose top aides, one by one, are falling down, being convicted, and have the potentiality of telling very bad stories about the president of criminal behavior.
One headline that came out over the weekend that we don't want to see buried in this torrent of new news was that it turns out that the White House counsel apparently has been talking with the special prosecutor. The White House counsel is the lawyer for the president or the presidency in his official capacity, and that he's been sort of freely talking for an estimated 30 hours with the Robert Mueller investigators. That's pretty serious stuff, too.
That is very serious stuff. As Watergate buffs will remember, John Dean, when he was still White House counsel to Richard Nixon, began talking to the prosecutors then. And for much the same reason, at least as media accounts go, Don McGahn wanted to make sure he would not be blamed for what is patently a series of illegal acts to obstruct justice. And apparently early on, the president, probably not realizing what he was saying, said, go talk to the prosecutors. And McGahn went off and spoke for 30 hours, which is quite extraordinary. And he is the lawyer, not for the president, but for the presidency. There's not even attorney-client privilege. That was stripped away, actually, during the Bill Clinton presidency. What goes around comes around. So we think that there is a window on the high crimes and misdemeanors that presidential obstruction of justice might well entail, that we, the public, have not yet seen.
Very interesting. And, again, something that reminds me of the Nixon era, Liz, is put up some of those headlines. I mean, there was so much big stuff happening. Like a lot of people forget, the Vice President of the United States, Spiro Agnew, quit, admitted to a tax evasion. There was a lot of just sort of sleaziness.
He was convicted. He didn't just quit. He had to leave.
And later on, after the president had quit, his campaign chairman and actually then Attorney General Mitchell, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, all end up in jail. I mean, the Watergate burglars were paid with cash that was kept in a safe chief of staff's office within the West Wing, which is just unbelievable. But I mean, when you see this kind of stuff, did it take time for the extent of the criminality to filter through to the public back then?
Absolutely. I mean, I tell the story many times. In November 1972, Nixon won with one of the biggest landslides in American history. The break-in took place in June 72. Nixon was elected. The cover-up started from day of the break-in. And by November, it was basically thorough. Didn't unravel. People didn't have any conception that Nixon was involved. He's elected with this huge landslide. And it started to unravel slowly but surely, and bit by bit by bit, until we had the Saturday Night Massacre in October '73, where the special prosecutor said, they're White House tapes, and I want to see what's going on. And when he started going after those tapes, and Nixon had him fired, then the American people said, you know something? You can't pick the prosecutor. We're not a banana republic. We're going to have a proper system here, and that's what happened.
But there's one thing that happened then, and with your role, among others, so critical, that we have not yet had here. The facts were found out not just by prosecutors doing what prosecutors do, bringing cases, investigating, but by public investigations on television with sworn testimony visible to everyone. And in the summer of 1973, it was the Senate Watergate Committee, and that's where we first heard John Dean describe the cover-up. That's where we learned about the enemies list. That's where we learned on television about the secret White House tapes. And then the House Judiciary Committee that Liz Holtzman was such a prominent figure on, which was also in public. We're in this weird situation where we're relying on Mueller. He seems very professional. They're doing a very good job of this, and they're keeping their mouths shut, which is also, I guess, in this moment impressive, but we're all doing guesswork. And if the Democrats win either house, I do think that irrespective of whether impeachment makes sense, there needs to be a real set of public investigations and public hearings to let the public know about the attack on our democracy that took place.
And to be clear, I mean, the Mueller investigation, however damning it may be, is at best a roadmap that gets handed to Congress, which then has the power to do something with it.
Right. That's what happened the last time. That's what happened in Watergate, the only time we ever had a successful impeachment effort. The prosecutor ultimately turned over their information to the House Judiciary Committee, gave us a roadmap, and we went forward. But Michael's absolutely right. The Senate Watergate hearings were vital because they educated the American people about what was happening. So remember the timeline. November, Nixon is reelected with this huge landslide. Things start to uncover. One of the burglars says, oh, there were higher-ups involved. Then the Senate says, we're going to get into this process. And they held hearings. That's when Dean testified, what he said was, I told the President of the United States, a little bit like Michael Cohen, but it's not hidden in court. It was before the TV cameras. I told the President of the United States that there was a cancer on the presidency. I told him that hush monies were being paid. And he said to me, oh, well, I know where we can get some more money. So President Nixon said, well, that never happened. But the critical thing about that was that it educated the public. So when the special prosecutor said, ooh, they're tape recordings, the question was, now we can tell, is Nixon telling the truth? John Dean telling the truth? And we know why the tape recordings are important. And if you don't know the background, the public support for that won't be there. And that's, I think, critical, that there has to be some serious public inquiry by the House, by the Senate, into what's going on, not just for impeachment purposes, but to explore and understand what happened in this administration.
And that, of course, is where we come in. This is why we try to come back to this subject from time to time and make clear that what's said under oath and in settings like congressional testimony or in court is really sort of a higher level, and we try to make sure we've got the timeline and the facts in place for people. And thank you, as always, for helping us to make some of that clear. We're going to take a